Welcome to the January 10th, 2023 City Council work session. I will turn it over to City Manager Benda to walk us through the agenda overview.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. I'd like to offer each of you a happy new year. This is our first meeting in the new year 2023. I also want to extend a warm welcome to our newest council members, Mayor Reed, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Mischens. I wish you the best and success in 2023. I wish that to all 7 of you in 2023 for our city of Lynchburg. This evening, Madam Mayor, before you have a couple work session items. Ms. Melva Walker, staff, will help introduce an outside consultant. I met Marjorie just a second ago. She's from similar space where I'm from, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so we had a good chat. She'll take up Home Investment Partnership American Rescue Plan to reduce homelessness and increase housing stability. She'll engage you on that. Then we have Deputy City Manager Greg Patrick, who will talk to you about school funding formula. Last year during the budget process, we talked about how best to appropriately fund Lynchburg City Schools. One of the things that I worked with Greg on, in fact, in the city of Norfolk was a school funding formula. So we've talked about it, wanted to bring it forward to you here. I think I saw Dr. Brennan, Deputy Superintendent, is Deputy Board Chair, excuse me, Vice Chair, almost elevated there, is in the audience, so I just wanted to recognize him really quickly. And then we have a couple business item briefings, which just staff getting you engaged on what's coming ahead and what might require a vote and kind of help you to kind of think through that. And then there are 2 closed session items that are before you. And with that, Madam Mayor, turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Benda. Before we begin this afternoon's agenda, I would like to make a motion to amend the agenda to add the discussion of a resolution expressing the City of Lynchburg's intent to stand as a sanctuary city for Second Amendment rights. Do I have a second? Okay. Vice Mayor Feraldi has seconded. Further discussion? No discussion? Okay. So we vote. Okay, thank you. We will position discussion on this item at the end of our work session after council concludes all other business. Moving on to work session agenda items. Number 1, Home Investment Partnership American Rescue Plan to reduce homelessness and increase housing stability. Ms. Melva Walker.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Reed, Vice Mayor Feraldi, and members of City Council. The city has been awarded $1,498,471 in Home Investment Partnership American Rescue Plan, referred to as Home ARP, funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, to assist individuals and households who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, and other vulnerable populations. The purpose of HUD funding provides these funds to the city and to cities across the nation to reduce homelessness and increase housing stability. The funds may be used for housing development, tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services, and non-congregate shelters. To receive these funds, the city must develop and submit to HUD a Home ARP allocation plan. The city procured the consulting firm of Mullen and Lonergan Associates to prepare for the city the required plan. Ms. Marjorie Willow, principal of M&L, is here this afternoon to present an overview of the draft plan. Ms. Willow?
Thank you and good afternoon. So this program, as Melva explained, is primarily for assisting persons who are homeless or who are at risk of becoming homeless. And this specific pot of money is a carve-out of the much larger ARPA funding that the city of Lynchburg and communities across the country received. And this specific $5 billion supplemental carve-out was for assisting individuals or households who are homeless, at risk of becoming homeless, and other vulnerable populations. And the funds can be used for providing housing, rental assistance, supportive services, and non-congregate shelter, which are, think of a motel. A non-congregate shelter is where a family or an individual has its living quarters with its own separate bathroom. So it's not a communal bathroom type of facility like an emergency shelter. It's more like a transitional housing facility. And as Melva said, the city is receiving just under $1.5 million. And this is a one-time grant. So as a means of reaching out to the required stakeholders to identify what the needs are, and this was, when I say required, this was part of HUD's requirements for the program, that the city did have to reach out to required stakeholders. A lot of needs were identified, and what we have for you tonight is a very high-level summary of the needs that really speak to how the funds can be spent. So there is a need in Lynchburg for more affordable and accessible rental housing for lower income households. And there's a need across the spectrum for bedroom sizes. So 3 and 4 bedroom rental units for families, but individuals have difficulty finding studios or 1 bedroom units that they can rent. A need for rental assistance to make housing affordable for households who are living at that lowest income segment of 0 to 30%. More supportive services are needed to get people housed and to help them maintain stable housing. And these would include services like case management, employment training, financial counseling, childcare, and other services that, when provided to individuals who are housed or who are trying to become housed, help them achieve that goal. And as far as households who are at risk of becoming homeless, and those would be families and individuals who maybe if they miss a single paycheck and they can't pay rent, those are individuals and families who are at risk of homelessness. But also the stakeholders here in Lynchburg identified, there are households who are living without rental subsidies, so they're on their own, paying their rent by themselves, but they're barely able to make ends meet on low-wage jobs. These are also households who are at risk of becoming homeless. So we also had to look at a lot of data, census data, but also a lot of data provided by the Continuum of Care. So data about persons and families who entered the homeless system through the Central Virginia Continuum of Care. And there's a few points I want to highlight. I see there's one highlighted there. So over the course of a year, about 18 months, there were 673 persons who were served in the Continuum of Care homeless system. 239 of those were experiencing homelessness for the first time. 157 individuals were homeless because they were fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and including human trafficking. The city had a very robust emergency rental assistance program, and over that about a 2-year period, over 2,400 households qualified for rental assistance during the pandemic in order to stay housed. So again, these are households that could still be considered precariously housed, simply because they're at 0 to 30% and they needed rental assistance to pay arrears that they might have incurred as well as going forward, plus utilities so that they wouldn't lose their housing and then become part of the homeless population. So based on all of the input from the stakeholder outreach that we conducted as well as all of the data analysis, the priority needs were that we identified or include the development of affordable and accessible rental housing, and permanent supportive housing units for homeless persons. And when we talk about permanent supportive housing, this is rental housing that also includes a very strong component of wraparound services, like I mentioned earlier, especially case management, but maybe also mental health or physical health services that are needed for them to remain housed and be able to maybe even achieve self-sufficiency. So when you look at this slide in that proposed budget, there are a total of 7 eligible activities. That's another, unique characteristic about this program. It's very limited in how the funding can be spent. There are only these eligible activities. And so, although they're listed here, the city has determined, because of the small amount of funding, even though it's almost 1.5 million, when you're talking about providing new rental housing, it's really not very much money. And so in order to generate transformational change with these funds, it's really, the budget is really focused on using the funding through this program for the bricks and mortar of the program. Supportive services, for example, although I talked about there being a need for them, there are other resources, and the continuum of care provider agencies would be able to provide those services. So basically that eliminates having to allocate some of these funds for that line item. And so the proposed budget is $1,348,624 to be allocated to the development of affordable rental housing. And then the city is also going to allocate 10%. They're not taking the maximum 15%. They feel that the 10% is adequate for planning and administration, just under $150,000. The city has to spend all of these funds by 2030, and September of 2030. And while that seems like a very long way out, a little over 8 years, when you're talking about developing new housing, it really is not a short-term project. You have to acquire land, you have to go through the financing, packaging process. I mean, it can take a couple of years to actually put together all the funding. So for the city to be able to spend the funding by September of 2030, the timing of getting this approved is actually very good now. And in speaking with Melba Walker and her staff, as well as the continuum of care, a couple of times it was mentioned that the Old Forest Village and the new Florida Terrace projects, both of which are located in Lynchburg, would serve as good models for creating new affordable rental housing for these qualifying populations. And so I bring that up as an example, both for the council as well as for anybody who is wondering what this project might look like. So just moving on to next steps before, if you have any questions, the regulations for this funding amount require a 15-day public comment period, which is expected to run from today through 2 weeks from now, although that is a 15-day period. The draft plan has been posted online for review by the public, and there is an opportunity to provide written comments, which are encouraged, and the email address is for Haley Campbell, staff in the planning department. 2 weeks on January 24th, the required public hearing is scheduled before council at 7:30. And at that time, oral and written comments would also be accepted. And then the city anticipates submitting the application on or about January 31st. It is due by the end of March. So the city is anticipating it, trying to submit it by the end of the month.
Any questions or discussion? Vice Mayor Ferraldi?
Thank you for your presentation and all those who helped put this together. I have a few thoughts and considerations. So you had briefly mentioned what these funds can be used for. Are there any other ways that these federal dollars through ARPA can be used?
So this is part of the larger ARPA funds, which have a very broad use of eligible activities. It's looser funding, but this specific $5 billion carve-out is more tightly restricted in what it can be used for, and those items listed on the budget are the limits of what it can be spent on.
So those are the parameters.
Yes, in terms of eligible activities, yes.
On that slide, it says the city plans to partner with local nonprofit organization or housing provider. Are we able to disclose what that may look like at all? And to understand where those dollars would be going would be helpful.
So HUD does not allow a community to engage in allocating the funds until HUD has approved this plan. And so that won't be known probably for 45 to 60 days once the city, the city won't start that process until 45 or 60 days after they submit the application and HUD approves it.
Okay. Is there some way we can get follow-up on that just when we know what organization we'll be doing? That'd be helpful, just so we know that I'm sure the dollars are going to a trusted organization. I just want to be certain on that. Is there any way for us to ensure that the development of affordable housing, what that looks like, what does that mean? Because I love the idea, but I want to know what the action, the metric of success will be for that.
Well, the units will be built in the same way that other affordable housing has been built in Lynchburg. If you're talking about how it looks, the physical appearance.
More just what is the metric of success? What's the actionable, tangible?
The number of units that will be built.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's all for now for me.
Sure.
Any other discussion? Councilman Wilder?
Yes, thank you for the information. I really appreciate it. Now, will these funds also be similar to the way they do go to the CDAC committee, or is it separate?
Yes, we will go through the same process of going to CDAC and then coming to council with the actual project.
So
Once we develop and get approval of the plan.
and are these funds different than the regular funds we get from HUD?
Yes, absolutely, they are.
But
And like you said, they're restricted to these types of activities.
But it'll be the same process.
We'll use the same process.
So in the past, it goes to the CDAC committee, which is local residents serving that committee, and then once those proposals go out, they'll bring that to the CDAC committee to review those, and the CDAC committee make the recommendations.
Yes, sir.
And then to qualify for those nonprofits, they have to meet certain requirements, like to be a CHODO or something of that nature, or is there any requirements that anyone can apply?
No, it'll be any nonprofit that can apply. It'll kind of be like we'll develop an RFP probably to go out to the public to submit a plan. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be a nonprofit. It could be a for-profit developer.
Okay. And is the process different than the normal CDBG funds?
The process won't be different.
Eligibility.
Yes.
Okay. So it's different. Okay, great. All right, thank you. Appreciate
A
it.
set of new regulations.
Okay, wow. And but just again, I've worked with CDBG for 20 plus years, and I was just admire the work that Melvin and her team does, and it's always so efficient, and it really helps fill a void, especially now with the price of rent in our community. Programs like this are so important, so I'm so happy that we receive some funds in our community can address that issue. Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? Thank you, ladies, very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item number 2, considerations for establishing a school funding formula. Mr. Greg Patrick.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council, Mr. Vice Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. The presentation I have for you today is a little bit of my history on establishing a school funding formula at the City of Norfolk, and some background information on the different methodologies that council may consider if you do consider a school funding formula as part of this budget development season or any upcoming budget development season. This is not a recommendation from staff that we do develop a school funding formula more. It's just informational, and I'll share with you some of the bumps and bruises along the way that we experienced in Norfolk. So first, before we dig into the school funding formula, a little bit on the on school K-12 funding in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It is the state's constitutional responsibility to provide a system of free and appropriate public education. So a lot of folks ask, who has a funding formula across the state? Everyone does. The state has a school funding formula. It's called the Standards of Quality. And essentially what that does is there's two parts to the Standards of Quality funding formula. The first is establishing the minimum funding required for a school division to meet the standards of educational quality as determined by the Director or Secretary of Instruction at the state. And the second is how that minimum is split between the state and the individual localities and school divisions. So while every locality doesn't have a school funding formula for how its local funds are distributed to school divisions, the state does fund education through a school funding formula. Local governing bodies allocate resources. School boards operate the school system. So as you are all probably intimately aware, the way the state funds education sets up a oftentimes contentious relationship between the councils and the schools. The councils are providing the money, but technically have very little say into how that money is spent once it is received by the school system. Local school divisions do not have any taxing authority in Virginia. All funds must be appropriated through the local governing body. And we talked about the state having a school funding formula. The state sets through its funding formula a local funding floor. So the minimum that localities must provide for their school systems, and that minimum is called the required local effort. And this is the amount of funding of the total standard of quality funding that is required between the state and the localities that the locality must provide. That required local effort is determined by a number of financial metrics. The value of real property in the locality, which is weighted at about 50%, the adjusted gross income of the locality's residents, which is weighted at about 40%, and taxable retail sales. So that is the method of funding that the state has set up for its K-12 public education. So if we go to the next slide, what you'll find here is the Code of Virginia allows localities to appropriate funds to their school divisions in a couple of different ways. A lump sum model, which is what we use, which essentially appropriates all the funding that is going to go to the schools, to them in one lump sum, and they, from there, are able to determine how those funds are spent. Also, there is a categorical funding approach, which allows councils to appropriate funds to schools in one of 9 different funding categories. As you can see on the slide, the categories. A little bit of detail here. Firstly, not every school division spends money in each of these categories. Most school divisions, including the Lynchburg City Schools, does not actually spend any money out of the debt or fund transfers line. The city provides or pays the debt service on all of the school debt. Most school nutrition and food services are funded by USDA grants. Most school systems don't have contingency reserves, but those are the 9 classifications that council can appropriate funds to. The other part I would add is council is not required, if they chose a categorical funding methodology, to appropriate funds into each of the categories. You can appropriate X number of dollars into a specific category, and the rest can be considered lump sum as well. So let's take a look at Lynchburg City Schools, an overview of their FY 2023 operating budget. And this is the revenue to support the budget. There's about $106 million in total revenue coming in. Of that, about $63.5 million comes from the state. A smaller amount, $1.6 million, comes from the feds and other funding sources. And $40.8 million comes from the city of Lynchburg. When we talk about a school funding formula, we're talking about that $40.7 million. That is the locality's share of the cost of funding Lynchburg City Schools. All right, before we get into details about the different methodologies for a school funding formula, let's look at some of the benefits of potentially implementing a local revenue allocation policy, school funding policy. First and foremost, it makes budget planning for both the city and the school system significantly easier. It sets a reliable method that both parties can rely on to have an understanding of how much the level of funding that would be received each year. It is an objective method of providing funding. The reality of K-12 funding in Virginia is oftentimes where ideally the relationship between a council and a school board should be around performance. The way we fund K-12 education in Virginia makes the vast majority of those conversations around funding. So it really helps transition that conversation from funding to success. And a funding formula will link the economic success of the city to school funding. So if the city is successful economically, if our tax revenue is strong, then schools shares in that, and it sort of it recognizes that schools is an incredibly important economic engine, economic driver within the city. If we take a look at how to build a funding formula, the first thing we have to determine is which revenues go into that formula. What I would tell you after spending a lot of time negotiating the revenues that we were going to include in our Norfolk school funding formula with Norfolk Public Schools, what's really important is that the revenues that go in the formula should be those revenues which are driven by the city's economic success. So real estate, personal property, sales and use tax, business license tax, these are all taxes that grow as the city is economically successful. The taxes that you see here are the taxes that we included in the school funding formula in Norfolk. Funding formula models. Won't go into a great deal of detail here, but wanted to give council an understanding of some of the models that are out there. And we'll review each one independently. First, the constant share model. And these are not terms of art, this is just what we have taken to calling them. Constant share model is the model that we used in Norfolk. It's probably the most easy model to understand. It's simply put, you identify a bucket of revenues, and the city and the schools share that bucket of revenues each year at a specific a percentage split. In Norfolk, it was of those revenues you saw, city got 70% of those revenues, schools got 30% of those revenues. So again, it's really easy to understand. One of the downsides, it does not factor in enrollment or average daily membership, which is the kind of term of art at the state, which means if enrollment grows, the formula doesn't factor that in. If enrollment shrinks, the formula doesn't factor that in. The most difficult part about a constant share formula is negotiating the initial sharing percentage. In Norfolk, we went with the status quo. So what the current split would be when we looked at those revenues. But if that number isn't agreeable to council and the school board, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to use that model. The next model, the split growth model, firstly took a look at the region and some of our sister cities and counties to see who might have a funding formula, just to provide some context to council. What I can tell you, most of the cities in the area, the counties in the area, don't have a funding formula. One that does is Roanoke City. So Roanoke City and Roanoke City Schools have a funding formula. It is a split growth model, and essentially the way it works is, for lack of a better term, schools and the city split the growth in local tax revenue, 60% to the city, 40% to the schools. That's an example of a split growth model in action. Again, this is a little bit more complicated to calculate and to communicate to residents than the constant share model. Again, it does not factor in enrollment or average daily membership. The one benefit of a split growth model is it becomes much easier to negotiate up front the sharing percentage of any new revenue that's generated because it's forward-looking instead of backwards-looking like a constant share model would be. And again, important to use revenues that are tied to the economic success or performance of the city. A modified constant share model, very similar to the constant share model that we discussed on the first slide of these examples. The difference being it factors in enrollment by using by considering the city's required local effort as determined by the standards of quality. I won't go into a lot of detail there. We certainly can kind of work session this at some point, but bottom line, it is not driven by enrollment, but it's impacted by enrollment. And then finally, there is a per pupil model. Now, this is a model that I've not seen used at a local level, but this is the model essentially that the state uses through the standards of quality calculation. Essentially, it calculates the amount per student that the locality would provide to the school division, and then multiplies that amount by the enrollment, by the average daily membership. It is very much driven by enrollment. It can also result in pretty substantial fluctuations and swings in funding. If enrollment it increases quickly, all of a sudden the city is providing a level of funding that's significantly higher than it was the previous year. On the flip side, if enrollment is decreasing quickly, the level of funding the city would provide to the school division could decrease relatively quickly as well. This slide was one that we used when we were contemplating a school funding formula in Norfolk. And essentially what it did is it went back in time about 15 years and said, what would have happened had we implemented a school funding formula 14 years ago, and if we had chosen a constant share model and we had just gone with the status quo split share based on the bucket of revenues that we were considering. At the end of the day, what we found was, on average, in reality, local funding to the school system went up by about $2 million a year. Had we implemented the funding formula, that number would have been about $2.5 million per year. So the funding formula would have provided more funding to city schools. And what was really surprising is, over that time period that we assessed, there was very high growth in the early years of that time frame. And what that meant is the formula would have dictated that in those early years, the school division would have gotten substantially more funding than they did in reality. So because that happened in the early years, that compounded over this 13, 14-year period to, at the end of the day, combined over the lifetime of the survey period, schools received from the city about $115 million less than they otherwise would have received. So this is more just to give council an understanding of how we can take a look back in time and see what might have happened had we implemented the formula. So at the City of Norfolk, one thing that that was really interesting in taking a look at the results since the funding formula was implemented is that in years when the city performed well economically, there was very little contention around the budget. The Norfolk Public Schools received an increase every year, and there was very little public debate around school funding. One of the most interesting and really beneficial aspects of the funding formula was when COVID hit, and everyone thought our revenues were going to tank massively. We were able to use the formula to have a meaningful conversation with schools about, hey, we think we're going to see a massive, massive revenue decrease. The formula, therefore, dictates that our funding that we're going to provide to you guys is going to be substantially less than it was last year, to the tune of about $5 million. There was a great deal of concern that this was going to go over like a lead balloon. But the reality was, because we had gained some trust through using the formula, there was very little pushback. Everyone understood, and everyone felt like both the city and the schools were treated fairly and equitably, because there was no, it was very clear how the numbers were being calculated. So not only does it help in good times, but it helped when we were in a really difficult position financially. One of the things that we wanted to make sure that we did in Norfolk was build a comprehensive policy. So this isn't just about how do you calculate the split of operating funds. The policy actually included how we do the calculation, of course, but also what are the revenue sources. And we were very clear there. A true-up provision, because as we all know, and especially during COVID, budget projections and budget results are not always the same. So if that was the case, we needed a methodology to come back and true up the formula to actual results. And lastly, reversion funds. Reversion funds are those funds that if at the end of a budget year, the schools has unspent funds, how the school division was able to, the process that they would use to come back and ask the council to reappropriate those funds, and the uses that those funds could be used for, which were not ongoing expenses. They were one-time in nature. And Lynchburg has a very similar policy in place already. There was also a process to revise the policy, and there was a procedure for schools to request an increase in the local contribution if that increase was larger than what was being provided by the funding formula. And in order to do so, the school board would have to, by resolution, vote to ask the city council to raise a particular tax rate in order for that funding to be provided for whatever reason the schools needed additional funding. So it wasn't just an opportunity to come ask for more money. They had some real skin in the game there. Has it been a success? I think both sides would agree. Every year at our budget public hearing, in the past, the first two speakers were the superintendent of schools and the chairman of the school board. And prior to the implementation of the funding formula, the conversation went something like this: please fully fund the school's budget request. After the implementation of the funding formula, it was a conversation about how schools planned to use and implement the funding that was being provided. It totally changed the dialogue there. It depoliticized the funding of the school's operating budget, not the capital budget, which is a whole different kettle of fish. Budget planning is significantly more straightforward, and the schools, through the fiscal year 2023 budget, has not asked for more money than the funding formula has provided. Lessons learned, other considerations. The policy does not address debt service, capital maintenance, or capital construction, or school construction. So those are considerations that exist outside of the policy and remain school funding concerns and issues. Tax rate changes have a direct impact on school funding. If council were to raise or lower a tax rate, both parties have skin in the game. If it was a 70-30 split, and council were to lower, say, the real estate tax rate by a penny, the schools or the city would lose 70% of that revenue, and the schools would lose 30% of that revenue. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And adopting the policy, council adopted the policy by resolution. Schools never formally recognized the policy, but despite never formally recognizing the policy, they have followed it ever since its implementation. And that is everything that I have for council this evening.
Mr. Patrick?
Greg, I guess you had several different formulas here. And obviously I've been here, we've looked at the funding of the schools for a long time. We look at Lynchburg and we look at the state who actually funds based on ADM. I don't know how you can have any other formula other than enrollment, and how you can tie anything to performance other than the fact of lots of people are wanting to go to the school or lots of people are leaving the school. I look back historically, I see that we have like 40 million based on required local effort, somewhere around 20 million. Plus we have all the debt service and all the other items in the cafeteria that you haven't even mentioned. That's actually tied, and it's done by the state, by the Department of Ed. And the Department of Ed says, here's what you must do. The composite index is definitely tied from the fact of how rich we are as a community versus how poor we are as a community. The poorer we are, the less we have to fund our schools. So having any kind of formula that doesn't actually recognize the fact that there are less people using it is it's very counterintuitive to anybody who thinks or runs a business. You have less customers, but you get the same money. You have less people standing in line waiting for your school, and there's a waiting list versus people exiting. Lynchburg, we've lost over 2,000 kids over the last several decades. There hasn't been any change because every year it's like, hey, we got this money last year, we want more or the same this year. When we look back over the last 20 years, before this dramatic exodus of students in our public school system and the decline in the ADM, what we had is probably about 20% of Lynchburg being involved in public education. Now we're down to about 7,400. They include pre-K 4, pre-K 3. Next year it'll be pre-K 2 to get the numbers up. It's down and down as far as the numbers. We're about 9% of the 82,000 population that are actually taking advantage of the free public education. So having something that is tied to enrollment has to be. Something that's tied to performance has to be. Performance isn't just how well the city's doing. It's how well the schools are doing. Are they accredited or not? Or how does it look on Zillow and people's property values when they get a 2 versus a 10? These are things that are critical rather than just punting and saying, hey, we're going to come up with some nebulous formula based on some other place. I don't think it's a non-starter to me. Secondly, what I would like to see, and I do appreciate you having those categories there, I think and I hope that in this upcoming budget that we will recognize that the area, you had 9 areas, obviously we don't fund debt service because the city pays it, the cafeteria workers are separate. But when we're looking at actually the funding based on the declining enrollment, we need to actually, and if we want to really improve schools, we've got to do in this upcoming budget categories. I've seen nothing but the bureaucracy and the administration of the school system grow. Meanwhile, the difficulty in the classroom has been more challenging for our teachers. So the challenges have risen. The bureaucracy and administration has grown. I think in this budget year and the upcoming, we have got to make sure that we actually say, here's where the lines are gonna be. Here's the amount of money based on the declining enrollment, based on our taxpayers' ability to pay with the composite index, and we're gonna actually say, enough. We're gonna, enough in the administration. Last year, I think an extra $1 million all went to administration. We need to make sure it's in the classroom, not in some area that doesn't help our kids learn. Performance is critical. People stand in line. You know, you look at some of the private schools, there's waiting lists for people to get in. And you have folks that are exiting our public school. And one is free, one you got to pay $8,000, $10,000 for. You kind of look at that and say, well, the performance actually is kind of looks at the market. And so performance, which we're required to have, is a high quality per the SOQ, the standards of quality. So those are things, if you're coming up with anything as a formula, those are the only areas that I think would be very good to have for not just the current council, but maybe in the future. But it has to be tied to those metrics. Has to be, absolutely. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Feraldi?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Greg, thank you for your presentation. It's a good reminder and refresher. All 6 of my colleagues, I think this is a really great opportunity to put a lot of the rigmarole of what we go through during a budget session to bed, at least I hope. If not, we can go through it again. But truly, I think this is an opportunity for all of us to offer input and create a structure to put something together that at least council can get behind. Did have a question. If we can get it, I think it would shed some light. Could we get a pie chart? I know it's probably in the budget that we considered earlier this year. It may not be, but if we did have a by category of the school budget, that would be helpful. That way we can see, hey, if we did go by category, what that may look like. So that would be nice to have for our information.
Well, I'll work with Don Witt, our Chief Financial Officer, but the information that we would have to solicit the schools for.
Yeah, sure. I certainly understand that, but that would at least give us a bearing of what things are currently looking like. For me, the devil, I think, will be in the details. What does it look like? I think Councilmember Helgeson brings up wonderful ideas and thoughts and considerations for how to approach this discussion and craft a policy to make schools competitive. And it's in that vein that I think, for me, reward success in that regard. If there is some component of ADM that can be used into it, I'm interested to see what that looks like. If more folks are going to Lynchburg City Schools, that should be something to reward. And so therefore more funds would go their direction. Alternatively, if folks are leaving the schools for whatever reason, that should be worked in there in some degree. I think that's a prudent thing to look at in how we balance this consideration. To the new colleagues, I have a bad problem of not being able to read my own handwriting, so forgive me. I think for me, I want to be mindful of, I know the budget process back and forth historically for us with the school board has been a challenge. And if there can't be consensus or agreement, at least from my perspective, either entirely or significant portions of these dollars, I'd be comfortable moving forward by category. And that's if we can't come to an agreement with what that policy looks like. I want to make that clear. It's not saying I want to go out right the gate for it, but I stand ready to do it. And partly, if we're going to get another 5%, which I think we're expecting from the state to go to teacher pay and so on and so forth, which is a good thing, I want those dollars that we're allocating specifically to go to that category for those reasons. Now, the devil's in the details, so I stand ready to offer ways of accommodating those things and expectations, ADM, success rate, graduation rates, dropping a blank, accreditation. All those things I think can be worked into it. But if we can't get to that consensus with the school board, I think it'd be prudent to consider all options on the table. So, thank you.
Any other questions or concerns? Councilman, yes.
If we can also, on Councilman Feraldi's, Vice Mayor Feraldi's request, if we could get some more detail than just pie charts on those categories, right? And actually look at where's the SOQs fall in those categories, what do we have above the mandates? And in addition to that, seeing how that's played out over the last 5 years, perhaps, where we can actually look at where's the funding increased in the school system in those 9 categories and just get a good historical picture of that would be helpful.
Any other questions? Yes, Councilman?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. We appreciate it. Again, because this area is so challenging, that's why I was welcoming some kind of a formula that we could use going forward seeking school board funds or school system funds. So I appreciate the idea. I appreciate the discussion. I think it's very helpful. I would like to also include, is the school board involved in the discussion about the formula, or just that we have discussions later?
So Dr. Wilder, Mayor, we did have an opportunity just before the holidays to meet with, is Dr. Brennan still here? Oh, so with Dr. Brennan and Chairman Dr. Coleman and Dr. Edwards. But I'd asked because it was something I had discussed with you and that we were changing, that today they would have had more people here, but they were, they have their meeting as well. So I did get to broach with just 3 of them, not the full school board. I do meet with Crystal, Dr. Edwards, the middle of this month about her budget. So this is really us stepping kind of, this is an introductory step into what this would look like. And if for fiscal 24 we just can't kind of get there, we're going to bring you back information, but we can't get to a decided formula because it is, who said something about devil in details and that kind of thing. It really is that. And so to answer your question, yes, only but with a few, not the full board. I did tell Dr. Edwards last week, sent her Mr. Patrick's presentation, and copied both Dr. Coleman and Dr. Brennan, and I believe the intent, we talked on the phone, was for her to share this presentation with her board so that kind of everyone knows that this conversation's happening.
Okay, thank you. I think it'd be good to have their input in part of this discussion because it's a community. I think just having all parties involved. When you're looking at budgets in the school board, it's just so you got to make sure you're getting all sides of what their needs are. I fear the factor that we say that if it's tied to improvement of the schools or something of that nature, then you're going to penalize them. So I feel that our kids may be at risk of being penalized. So I think it needs to be some more discussion as we look at that. Because I don't want to. Teaching our children is so challenging. Especially you have a high poverty rate, you have more challenging issues that come part of that poverty rate, the more issues, the more problems, the more single families. So you have some more challenges when you have a high poverty rate. So whether you take that into consideration as well. So I'd like to have some more discussions. As far as prior in your area in Norfolk, when they switched from the regular method to this kind of a method, was the amount pretty much similar to the same? Whether it increased or did it decrease, or what was your experience there?
So at that point in time, if I'm remembering correctly, when we adopted the 2019 budget, that is when council adopted the school funding formula. That budget included a real estate tax increase, and in that real estate tax increase, 2.7 cents of revenue, or about $5 million, went to increase the local funding to schools to set the base for the formula. And then after that, the formula took hold and dictated the funding.
So was that base more than it had been prior?
It was. So it increased by $5 million.
Okay, because of that increase in real estate tax, whatever. Okay, thank you. I'm just glad to have this discussion. Now, as far as the time period, whether we do it or not, is this for the next year, 24, 25 possible budget, or?
Dr. Wilder, we can go as fast or as slow as council would like. What I hear from the panel is information. You want information. So what I would recommend, or what Mr. Patrick would do working with staff, is to do the same thing that we did in Norfolk, which is to do a look back, to kind of show you under the different models what the funding would look like and how that would play out. As far as a process, I do meet with Dr. Edwards the middle of this month, and I would offer that the mayor, vice mayor meet with the superintendent and board chair, vice chair, and myself. That's an ongoing monthly meeting. So to the degree that this will be a conversation with one another, and just as I proposed last year, I've proposed this year, there's a joint work session between the two bodies in that budget process. And as to whether or not we're successful in putting together what could be an approach or an option for our funding formula, could be at that. But again, faster or slow as we want to go. But in considering where we might be for budget proposal, understand kind of where we were last year was, I think, recognized in that chart. I could lay out options in that as if you were to layer in a particular one of the options, what that number would look like up or down based on that. So to your fast or slow, but I'm going to do my best to get you the appropriate data to help make an informed decision, whether or not it's in fiscal 24, or if you just say, hey, time out, we need to focus over here, we'll do it in fiscal 25. But again, the intent will be to get as much information as quickly as possible to you and your peers.
Okay. Thank you, appreciate it.
Councilwoman Dolan?
Thank you, Mayor. This is really a question more for the general public that's listening in. Of the 120-some odd school districts that we have, how many are using some sort of formula, and what is the traditional formula that they're using?
So that is a very good question, Councilwoman. There is not a lot of public information available there. I've reached out to Virginia First Cities, I've reached out to Virginia Municipal League, and Jim Regenball at Virginia First Cities. No one has a definitive database of information there. That said, Virginia Municipal League, at our request, is working through providing a survey there. What you'll find is there are a number of localities that will have very formal funding formulas in place. They'll be in the budget document. They'll be documented through a resolution, through some other official form. Other localities will have very unofficial funding formulas where they exist because that's been the practice, right? But it's never been formalized, it's never been documented. So collating that information together is something that we, in conjunction with our partners, are working on. That said, we did a survey of the surrounding areas, and the only locality that we looked at that had a funding formula in the area that was similar at all to the city of Lynchburg was Roanoke.
No. Thank you very much.
With the, Vice Mayor Feraldi mentioned the state funding. I think you said 5% is what they're expecting. Just to clarify, when we're doing this, when we're looking for this information, that should probably only apply to those SOQ funded positions, correct? So teachers outside of the SOQ funded positions would be an unfunded mandate for us to take care of them as well, correct?
Correct. And I'm going to get the numbers that I give you will be imperfect, but they'll be roughly right. So if we look at teachers in Lynchburg city schools, and you include librarians and guidance counselors, there are roughly 750. There are roughly 550 of those positions supported by the standards of quality. And our local composite index is, and I have it here in front of me, about 36%, roughly. So what that means is if the state provides a 5% salary increase for SOQ funded positions, the city would be responsible for 36% of that increase for the 550 SOQ funded teachers, and 100% of that increase for the roughly 200 non-SOQ funded teachers.
So that just proves why it's going to be so critical to get that detailed information and a lot more than just pie charts, so we can really dig in and see what we're looking at with the school budget.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Patrick, and also I'd like to wish you a very happy birthday.
Thank you very much. I was hoping to escape.
No, you can't. I love birthdays. Okay. Okay, moving on to our business item briefings. Okay, agenda item number 3, fiscal year 2023 general obligation public improvement bond issue. This item will appear before the City Council for action on January 24th, 2023. We're for Ms. Donna Witt.
It's actually all in one single stop, I think, right?
Oh, is it after that one? Yep, it's just all in order. Oh, is it really? Yeah. Well, look at you. Oh, look at that. Click that button. Yeah, where's my? There you go. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So, at your next meeting on January 24th, I'm going to be bringing you a resolution to give approval for a new bond issue. The purpose is, currently, we have a bond anticipation note, which is called a BAN or a line of credit, and this comes due June of 2023. And so part of this bond issue, we need to permanently finance this bond anticipation note, which is why it's called an anticipation note, because when you get to the end of it, you permanently finance it with the general obligation bond. So, and after that's done, you won't be surprised to know we're going to establish another BAN. And we have a whole reason we do that, I'm going to tell you. So the reason, one of the reasons is our goal is to not borrow money before we need the funds. Okay? So historically, we created a bonding strategy about 10 years ago. So with this, prior to that, I know Lee Newland's in the audience, we kind of had an agreement because he was in charge of the large transportation projects, which is what a lot of what we bond fund. And so we kind of had agreement, you tell me when you need money and I'll go get it. And that worked really well for a while until we hit that recession, and then life kind of changed. So what we found out was we were borrowing money, and then sometimes the projects would get delayed, or sometimes they would speed up and I wouldn't be ready. So we wanted to make sure we had a strategy that we weren't paying interest and principal before we needed to. So if you kind of think about a home project, you know you're going to redo a bathroom at some time. Well, you're not going to go get that money till you've got an idea of what you're doing and how much it's going to cost. So it's kind of that same thing. You don't want to start paying on money before you need it. So what we would do is we would establish this bond anticipation note every 2 or 3 years, and then any projects that were immediately moving forward, we would go ahead and fund those immediately in our bond issue. And then we draw down as projects move forward, and these are water and sewer projects along with city capital projects, school projects, anything that's been approved by council in the capital improvement plan. And so we would draw down that money only when we need it, which means we only pay interest when we borrow the money down, and we don't pay principal until we permanently finance that. And this really does allow for the movement of these projects, because like I said, sometimes they get delayed, sometimes they move forward. And so this gives us a way to have the money when we need it and not before. So a public hearing is required to do a GO bond, which is a general obligation bond. A general obligation bond is backed by the full support of the city. So these are very secure bonds. They're easy to sell. People like to buy them because they're secure, they're very safe. So a vote will be requested to approve the resolution to issue general obligation public improvement bonds not to exceed $78,500,000. And with at the next meeting, I'll be more prepared to tell you exactly what's in that bond issue. So we're still in the early parts of this. So as part of this bond issue, also coming up, what's required not only as a public hearing, but we go to New York to visit the credit rating agencies. We're required to be rated so that people will know what a great city we are. We go brag on the city, and they tell us we're either a credit risk or not. And I am pleased to say that we've always been a strong AA bond issue with our ratings. We always get very good remarks, but it's required to have a new rating every time you go to the bond market. We plan to sell these bonds the last week of February and close on them the first week of March. And Mayor, you will have some responsibility to do some serious signing. So, but just wanted to kind of give you a heads up of what's in the pipe. This resolution will come to you in the next week or so, and a list of the projects that we're going to be bond funding.
Great. Thank you. Any questions? Councilman Hugginson?
Thank you, Donna. I guess it would have been helpful if some of that, I don't know why that wasn't in our packet, the presentation that you gave. It would also be nice to know what the funding is actually used for, because anytime we're borrowing more money, that's an extra burden on our taxpayers. I mean, they got to pay back the debt service. You know, I read your report here, and it said it's for permanent funding in the police headquarters, which we all voted unanimously in favor of that police headquarters. But where we didn't vote unanimously was that $33 million of ARPA money. That could have easily lowered how much was going to be having to be financed. If we would have spent the $33 million rather than, you know, the different electronic trash carts and all the statues and the brand new amphitheater and the floodplain, all of that would have meant we have less to borrow. Less to borrow means we have less debt service to our citizens. Less debt services for our citizens mean we can lower the tax rate. So before I vote in favor of issuing yet more debt, which is we're going to have that continued burden, I would actually like to see what it's for, rather than just, you know, a wing and a prayer saying, hey, here's some good things it's for. Because the previous, it looked like you said the previous line of credit with the bands were 42 million. Now somehow this jumps up to 78. So I'd like to see that definitely before the public hearing. Thank you.
Councilman Wilder?
Yes, thank you for the information. And I know you're bringing more back to us at the next session. I just want to commend you and your staff for the great work you do. Between the audit report we received and the bond rating we received is always a AA strong rating. So it just shows how feasible, how financially sound Lynchburg is, and how your team is always doing an amazing job in our community. And I think once we look at funding for our community and all the funding sources and the debt limits and all the things that come together, all those are so important as we look at a livable community, a community that has statues and monuments. I know they're doing a statue on 5th Street in recognition of former Mayor N.W. Thornhill. So he was a historical figure in our community. There's a great landmark that he contributed so much to our community, so we're going to be recognizing him. So those kind of things make Lynchburg a more of an attractive community, and also pay homage and honor some of our past, some of our great leaders from our past that contribute so much to our city. So many things that causes tourists to come to our community. Those are some things that make Lynchburg a more livable community and help the quality of life. But thank you for your department, and thank you for just always doing such a strong team here in Lynchburg. Thank you, appreciate it.
Anyone else? No? Okay, well, thank you so much, Ms. Witt, appreciate it. All right, moving on to agenda item number 4, additional city street mileage for Virginia Department of Transportation highway maintenance payments. This item will appear before City Council for action on January 24th, 2023. Mr. Lee Newland, hi.
Hi, Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. This item is to increase the city's street lane mileage for FY 2024. It's for highway maintenance funds. The Commonwealth Transportation Board pays the localities that maintain their own streets a rate, and it's set forth in City Code, Section 33.2-319. Virginia Department of Transportation requires City Council to pass a resolution requesting these streets to be added. And so the city staff has come up this year with 5.23 lanes of lane mileage to be added. It's shown here on the maps, and it's also on the U1 that is attached, which U1 is a VDOT form that we have to submit. They are streets over in the new Elmwood, Blackwater Run subdivision off of Elmwood. It's a section of Liberty Mountain Drive on the in front of the East Campus and the roundabout and the parking deck that was put in. It runs from Candlers Mountain Road to the southern city limits. There's a section of Mill Lane that has been missed in previous submittals, and it is, we have found out that it needs to be added. It's about half of Mill Lane that has not been added previously. And then there's a section of Lakeside Drive that is going from 2 lanes where it used to go over top the dam to 4 lanes where it's going across the new bridge. So it's an additional 2 lanes that we're adding to it. All these will add about $79,800 at the current rates to the annual payment. The rates are set every year by the CTB, Commonwealth Transportation Board. The payments per lane mile, they are dependent on the classes of the roadways, and the roadways are either classified as minor arterials or they are local and collector streets. Lynchburg has about 809 miles of lanes. That's about 382 roadway miles. 201 of these are arterials. 606 of them, 608, I'm sorry, is collector local streets. Since 1986, fiscal year 86, the rates have increased every year except for 5 years, and the last one was in 2020. That they did not go up. Currently, the rates are about $24,000 a lane mile for arterials and $14,000 a lane mile for collectors and local streets. Using the rates for this current year, Lynchburg will receive a little over $13.4 million in funds that are dedicated to be used for street maintenance. And on an annual basis, the city has to report our maintenance activities to VDOT and make sure that we are spending at least what they are reimbursing us. And this will come back in front of council on the 23rd for a final vote.
Any discussion or questions? 24th. Yes. Any questions? Councilman Hugginson?
Just a comment. I appreciate this. You know, it's amazing, 13 million. We got lots of roads that need some work. So this is the repaving. Is there any ability for redoing some roads? You know, like some of the roads, for example, I drove on Wigington Road and I was really surprised to see the condition of Wigington, you know, especially when you got some of the asphalt that's falling in over on the side. So is there any, I recognize what we're looking at now is just the additional of the miles, but of that 13 million you talked about, is there ability to improve some roads, or is it, this is for the repaving and maintenance?
It is mainly for maintenance, so repaving, cleaning ditches, working on bridges, maintaining wear bridges, the street lighting system, all items like that are all included in the maintenance.
So if part of the road is falling into the ditch, there's ability to improve that over there?
Yes, sir.
Possible.
That's
Good.
part of the
Thank you.
maintenance.
Anyone else? No? Okay, thank you, Mr. Lynn. I appreciate it. Is there any addition to our business item briefings? City Attorney, did you have an addition?
Yes. The next item that's on the agenda, the item number, I believe it's number 5.
Yep.
This was added to our agenda via a motion for discussion this evening. What's on it is a resolution that essentially establishes the City of Lynchburg and its corporate limits as a Second Amendment sanctuary. The purpose of the resolution being specifically to take a position and stance by the city to oppose legislation and other government action that would hinder the right to bear arms as defined and described under the Second Amendment and as interpreted by the Supreme Court of the United States and the Virginia Supreme Court as well. Really what that resolution does and what it means for the city is basically, as I said, taking a position and being a formal means of ability that the City Council commits to be able to appropriate funds, to take court action, and other lawful actions that the city council has at its disposal to be able to oppose such legislation coming out of Congress and the General Assembly.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion or questions? Are there any?
Discussion, I'll discuss it. My thing is spinning. I don't want it to close all my things then, because I can't see the.
Is this the resolution that I emailed, that you kind of,
This is the
some of you emailed back?
revised resolution I had sent back to city council for review. There were a few changes made to the previous one.
Thank you.
So the question is whether or not we're going to discuss this? Is that the question?
Yes, the only matter before council this evening is to discuss whether or not the city should become a sanctuary city for purposes of the Second Amendment.
Vice Mayor Feraldi?
Mr. Friedman, would you be able to opine as to what that means so we're all on the same page, both those in the audience, council, friends in the news?
What it means for the city to become a Second Amendment sanctuary.
Forgive me if I may interrupt. I'm sorry.
Sure.
From a procedural standpoint, with this being as a business item briefing, what does that mean for tonight?
I see. So what that means for a business item briefing is this is an introduction to the idea of the city becoming a Second Amendment sanctuary. So the intent is not necessarily to vote on it right now or to vote on it this evening. It's to give City Council the opportunity to consider the resolution that's before it, make any proposed changes, discuss it, debate it, and then at the appropriate time, address the matter for a vote, send it to a public hearing, however council wishes to proceed on the resolution.
So in order for this council to even move forward tonight, in the future, with or without a public hearing, there would have to be a motion associated.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
So I lost.
Sorry?
So I lost this. We were.
Councilman Helgeson?
Yeah, so I lost this. So it was under business item briefing where we changed the agenda.
Yes.
It's not under this evening's agenda, so today is the time that we're talking about this, right? Isn't that what we're?
We amended the work session agenda,
Yeah, to talk about it today.
and now we're discussing it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so with that, I guess, I'm glad that it's back on the agenda. I look back a few years ago, I pulled out some old newspaper articles, and it was neat to see some of us that weren't here, some of us that were on council and not. We had 1,000 people show up and said, hey, we need to do something about this because they're so concerned. The neat thing was that at the time, or the sad thing at the time was, it was very difficult. We had lots of folks that said, no, we don't want to deal with it. It was hard to get a public hearing. It was hard to then actually find a place where you could have a public hearing. The city staff said, let's have a public hearing in city council chambers, which only holds 165 people. Their then proposal was saying, hey, we'll have some people here, some people can watch it via satellite over at the Chamber of Commerce building, a public hearing where you have that. So I'm glad that we kept pushing. We found another place. Liberty offered a place to have it at the conference, or the Performance Center, offered all sorts of wonderful things, and the city fortunately said, yep, we'll have it at the EC Glass. EC Glass, it was held, there was lines, there was people that came out, started at 7:30 in the evening, ended about 2 o'clock at night. It was the most peaceful, articulate group of folks that ever came out. It was nice to see. People have voted in 2 different elections saying we care about our constitutional rights. I recognize that this is on the agenda tonight. I recognize there's people that may want to talk about other things, about having other public hearings, but I've heard that. I've watched a lot of it. Hopefully, if those of you who haven't seen the public hearing before, watch the 6.5 hours of it, because I'm ready to make a motion that we approve the Second Amendment Sanctuary City of Lynchburg, and I'll make that as a motion right now.
Second.
Thank you. I don't think there's really much else to add because of the fact that we have discussed this. It's been before the local community. Again, the article shows 1,000 people came, hundreds of people spoke. It's critical, and I'm thankful that the city attorney had reviewed the old resolution. Madam Mayor, I'm thankful that you brought it forward yet again for us to discuss today. Having another public hearing can be good for people to listen and learn, or you can actually look and say, let's watch the one that was 6.5 hours before. Quite frankly, it was the longest public hearing, the biggest attended, and actually the most insightful. It was neat to sit there and watch. I mean, it was funny. You know, you see me get up and go to the bathroom. I go a lot more in my old age, but sitting there at the public hearing, hour after hour, the people coming up and having just totally different concepts and different ideas. It wasn't just, hey, I want, protect my gun. It was historical. It was political. It was very articulate, very insightful. It was the best public hearing. And it was fantastic to learn from it, and I was so thankful the citizens came out. We had more police at that E.C. Glass High School than I've ever seen, more than even the riots downtown. And it was the most peaceful thing ever, because these gun owners are not gun nuts. They're law-abiding citizens that are going to protect you and I. They were very concerned that government was intruding. They were going to attack them and take away their private property. I don't think that's a good thing. I'm very appreciative that this is brought forward today, and at this time, I'm hopeful that folks will actually vote in favor of it. It was really disappointing and disheartening to hear after people and citizens got up and spoke for 6.5 hours, that as soon as it was done, council members pulled out typewritten speeches and read them verbatim. It's insulting. When you listen and you have something where you're listening to citizens, you actually listen to what they say and you act on what they say. And they overwhelmingly said, we want this. It's time for us to act, to uphold the Constitution, and I'm thankful for it, and hopefully this can pass unanimously today. Thank you.
Second. Councilman Dolan, can I just pause you for 1 second? I have a clarification.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
with a motion on the table, what I would recommend is, as I understand it, the movement is recognized first, and the person that seconds it is next recognized. The subsequent individuals that would have raised their hand to speak would then follow.
So
would be our typical.
Councilman Missions is next?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Wow, what a tremendous honor it is to be here in my first business meeting and have this brought before us. This document matters, this Constitution right here. That's why I carry a pocket copy of it everywhere I go. It matters. There's been a lot of bloodshed for it, and people's rights matter. And we want to make Lynchburg say loud and clear that those rights matter, okay? These rights, they're granted by our Creator and affirmed in our founding documents in both the United States Constitution and the Commonwealth of Virginia. And people deserve to be able to defend themselves. And for our city to honor that is just a tremendously inspiring thing to me. It's a bold statement from our new majority that says your rights are protected in Lynchburg, that you can defend yourself as an individual, that you can defend your family, that you can defend your home. So for these very reasons, it also sends a message to violent criminals that if you try to harm someone in our city, local government stands behind the right for law-abiding citizens to defend themselves and their loved ones. The citizens spoke loud and clear 3 years ago, very clear, through multiple public hearings regarding this matter, and the Democrats didn't listen to them at all. But I will, and your new majority will, and that's why I'll be supporting this motion, and I'll be voting for a Second Amendment sanctuary.
Councilman Dolan.
I have a procedural inquiry, if you don't mind, Councilmember Dolan. Is the motion to approve now, or is it to put it on the agenda for tonight for approval?
As I understand the motion on the table, it's to adopt the resolution that's before City Council.
Well, first, I find that interesting because Councilmember Halverson has always said we don't vote on anything during our work session. But nobody here is talking about the 60-plus emails that we all received within the last 24 hours, that people were just begging us not to deal with this at this point in time. When our city is faced with immense challenges, it's unfortunate, and it's also shameful that the first item put before us by the new majority is a 2A resolution, an item that holds no legality and that we have no jurisdiction over. This is a disservice to our citizens and a distraction, and it's an embarrassment to our city. The Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution clearly establishes, and you know that, you have that in your hand there, federal law is supreme to state law. If state law conflicts with federal law, the federal law is the ultimate authority. In effect, in the event that any of the conflicts about the Second Amendment rights, federal law supersedes state law and local ordinances. So the resolution is irrelevant, meaningless, since Lynchburg must honor court decisions and cannot enforce a Virginia law that a court deems unconstitutional. The right to bear arms is guaranteed under the Second Amendment, and the appropriate process for challenging a law's constitutionality, including gun laws, is to challenge it through the court system, not through meaningless resolutions that serve to divide. As I stated during my comments in the public hearing on January 14th, 2020, it is not in City Council's purview to pass resolutions on matters beyond which the City Council has no direct authority, and that this conversation belongs in the General Assembly, and your view needs to be addressed to those legislators. When I was sworn in as an elected official, as were all of my colleagues in the City of Lynchburg, I swore to uphold the United States Constitution and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia. I cannot, in good conscience, violate my oath of office by advocating to disobey state and federal laws. Therefore, I would not support this resolution. You know, what are we going to do? We're going to have billboards as you enter the city of Lynchburg saying, Lynchburg welcomes you. Bring all of your guns as you come in. I mean, you know, and Councilmember Miskins ran on, he has a program, he has an agenda, he has a way to get rid of crime in Lynchburg. Is this it? We're going to advocate for more guns? Come on, let's get down to the work of the city, please. I just think it's a diversion, and it does not belong here on this dais. Thank you.
Councilman Wilder.
Yes, thank you for your comments. Again, you know, the part that I'm concerned about, first of all, I need to ask the attorney, does this affect, everyone has the right to bear arms. Does this increase that? You're still able to bear arms in our community, is that correct?
Yes, within the bounds of the Constitution and the laws of Virginia and the United States, that's correct.
And to me, we had the event like in 2020, whatever it was, before COVID, I think. It was the thousands of persons came out, I think because there was a narrative that we're going to take your guns. And I think at the time, I think it was Governor Northam, I believe, he had made certain policies that it caused certain persons to say, he's going to take our guns away, he's infringing upon our rights. So it kind of stirred up a lot of people where they didn't quite understand, they're not taking your guns away. And my mind goes to the situation that happened the other day in Newport News, Virginia, where a 6-year-old took the gun from his, I don't know if it was a male or female, the child took the gun from the mother and went and shot the school teacher twice, in her hand and also I think in her chest, I believe. So, and one of the parts of that legislation that Governor Northam had was that parents are responsible if you don't keep your guns locked up. I was reading another report that talked about all the guns that are taken out of cars in our community because the cars are not locked or the cars are broken into and they steal so many guns in our community. I would like to at least see the police chief here before we make a vote. I would love to see the police chief here to get his thoughts and get his ideas on this matter. So I do not support this motion, especially right now when a teacher just got shot from a child that was 6 years old, and we want to bring this as our first motion. But so many things are going on. We got some crime in our community. We need to continue to address that. We know the police have certain plans they're doing, and with one voice, one community, one voice, and working on various things. We need to continue to support our police officers and support our different nonprofits that are working to reduce crime. I can't understand about bringing more guns in our community, but you still have the right to bear your arms. So I don't see why this motion now, and that was really 2 years ago, why it's even relevant today. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Feraldi.
I'm still learning more information about the really, really tragic situation that my colleague just referenced, and I could be wrong. In my research, it's my understanding, and listening to the radio this morning, that she obtained that firearm illegally, thus making her a criminal. Doesn't change the very tragic circumstances of that narrative. Yet this consideration is for law-abiding citizens. I've pondered this, and I'm torn. I have folks who I look to heavily for the political, legislative, and governing success of this city that I hold in strong respect. And some of those folks are on difference of opinion on this one, and how, from a procedural standpoint, to adopt this. I want to be clear, this is going to adopt, and it's going to adopt 5-2. And I balance that with someone I also look up to immensely. I often would say on this dais, no politician has ever heard from their constituency too much. I put immense respect on that. And even for those items that I vehemently disagree with, that I know no way will I vote for, I'll vote for a public hearing. I know there were some issues a couple years ago about how the public hearing came to be, but I do commend Councilman Wilder for sticking to that vote to have a public hearing and allowing that to happen. I'd like to point out there are some folks who would like to speak tonight who have indicated their support. I know one of those folks is here already. Maybe pending where this goes, he might withdraw. I do not want to rob folks the ability to be able to speak. Even if it was 2 years ago, I wasn't elected, although I was the first to speak. And so even if it doesn't go to a public hearing, even if we adopt it today, I think there's prudence in those who have signed up to speak tonight about this. Do we want to vote ahead of that person? I know one person is here tonight who's decided to sign up. He may pull back and say, I don't need to, you just voted for it. But that other person isn't here. Is that the right thing to do? Here's my commitment, though. If I am in a position to vote in favor of this, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to smash that button, because I firmly believe the practical application of this resolution, is this. A couple years ago, that public hearing was before a legislative session where new laws were put on the books. It allowed localities to adopt various forms of policies that prohibit the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens to be utilized. City halls, public parks, streets, and other public gatherings. And so when I'm asked, why does this matter? What's the point? Maybe 2 years ago, you could have asked that question. You didn't know where the direction of the bills were going to go. But now we know. I won't say local bodies have the authority, nor the power, but we do have the ability to enact policies that do have serious infringement on my own ability as a law-abiding citizen to carry a firearm and protect myself and my family. So the practical application for me is this: simply put, by voting for this, I'm putting my name on the dotted line saying, hey, as long as this majority is in power, we're not going to consider those policies, those bills, those abilities that Richmond in their infinite wisdom has deemed of so appropriate for us to entertain. That is the practical application. And so if we do decide to vote on this right now, I'm going to vote for it. I do not believe it is right to push away the ability to hear a little bit from those who want to speak. That's the very bedrock of our constitutional republic, and I wouldn't dare do anything to infringe upon that right either. And so it's with that in mind, I'm going to be approaching this discussion. All of our rights are important, and how we engage in protecting those rights is even more important. I look forward to us supporting this. I look forward to it being adopted and righting the wrong from 2 years ago.
Madam Mayor, I did want to mention if a majority of council, I guess, wanted to wait to vote on this particular issue, a substitute motion could be made to table the matter to a definite date for when it would be considered for adoption. So there is an option if a majority of council is there versus not wanting to vote, because I do know this was up for discussion, not necessarily a motion to adopt. So council obviously does have that ability, if it chose, to make a substitute motion to table it to a definite date for consideration for adoption.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have a comment? I would like to address everyone. First of all, I would like to say that I have received your emails and your messages, and I want to say thank you for all of you who have emailed me with your concerns, and I have read them. And I think it's awesome as your new mayor to see people exercising their voice and telling me your concerns and sharing why you are for or against this, and you're, asking me questions, and all of us questions. I think that's wonderful, and we need to continue to do that. I want to hear from you because it does cause all of us to think and look at things from different perspectives, and that is what we should be doing. And I understand there's been confusion on what this means, and I hope maybe there's been some clarification for some of you through the comments tonight. I'm going to speak to those of you who have messaged me particularly about the fact that I campaign as a mother, as a family person, who have said, you ran about families and our children and about our community. And I still believe that. Our children and the safety of our city is still the #1 concern to me. And I want you to know I would never support anything that would cause any danger to our city. If I believed for 1 second that this resolution would do that, would increase a risk, I would not support it. So I want you to know that. I just do support our Constitution. We did make an oath, or take an oath, and this is simply just supporting our Second Amendment right that we've already been, given. And I think there was an additional explanation given tonight about kind of the additional things, but I do want you to know that I do not support guns being in the hands of criminals or people that have malintent behind them, and I will make sure that I work with law enforcement and our law enforcement community to make sure that we are prosecuting criminals that are misusing our weapons. And we do need to make sure that we talk with our community about being responsible. If they are gun owners, they need to be locking up their guns. They need to be making sure our children are not getting their hands on them. That is terrible, and these things should not be happening. So that's the comment that I wanted to share with you. I am reading your comments, and I'm absolutely considering all that you say, so thank you very much. Any other discussion? Councilman Taylor?
I believe we have the constitutional right to bear arms. Criminals do not turn their arms in. I remember a couple of years we was having gun buybacks. Criminals wasn't taking their guns and selling them back to the dealers. Only people with good sense that didn't want the guns anymore. I had a niece that was murdered. Had she had some kind of protection on her person, she probably would have survived. I support the Second Amendment. I think even during, right after Reconstruction, the government was telling families that they should have the right to protect themselves. And they encourage men to get guns to protect their families. So I support Lynchburg being a Second Amendment city.
Okay. Councilman Dolan.
I just wanted to say that, just let me be clear, I also support the Second Amendment. I do not support the Second Amendment resolution, and they're two totally different items.
Dr. Wilder.
Yeah, I'm just, for the attorney, I'm still so confused. We have the right to bear arms. And that's what I'm saying, we're not against that. That's why what is this, I remember when Councilman Nelson was here, and he stated that we couldn't do anything that would supersede state law or federal law. Is something in this document, other than a political show or just like we're a city of bee lovers, so we said we're a city of bee lovers or whatever. Is there something that I'm missing that this document is saying we can now bear arms? I thought we already could bear arms. What am I missing? Help me out.
The resolution is a formal position taken by City Council. It doesn't grant City Council or the City of Lynchburg any special rights or powers to defy laws that are federal laws or Virginia laws. What it is basically a position that the city is committing to. City Council commits the city to have the ability to appropriate funds and take court action to oppose laws that may be, or excuse me, to oppose bills that may be presented before Congress or before the General Assembly, or to take court action for the same. It's not necessarily indicating that there'll be defiance of laws that are passed. It is a formal position by City Council, is the way I understand it.
But any person who can legally purchase a gun, can legally have a right to conceal a weapon, whatever the policies are, they can still do that regardless of the statement.
So long as they adhere to the state laws in doing so, yes,
So
sir.
if you're a female or a male or anybody walking the streets and you want to legally have a concealed weapon or a weapon, you can still do that regardless of this, correct?
That's correct, so long as they hold a concealed weapons permit or meet an exception under the statute.
Okay, that's what all right.
Vice Mayor Feroldi.
Move the pending question.
So it sounds like Vice Mayor Feraldi is asking for a vote at this time on the motion on the table to adopt the resolution.
Okay, let's take it to vote.
Motion passes 5-2.
Okay. Moving on to roll call. Dr. Wilder.
Okay. Again, we're right before I came here, I attended a workforce board meeting. They are looking for our local representative. There was also local leaders that have been appointed by their body, like Campbell County, Amherst County, Appomattox, those leaders were there. So we didn't have one. So I was there for my job for Jubilee. So they are looking for a representative from Lynchburg to be a part of that committee. But they did talk about other policy they had. They did mention there was a report coming out from Old Dominion, I think through that Cardinal News thing, whatever, that was saying that the economy in our area was slower than other areas. They were saying that the article was misleading again, that it didn't include like Liberty and some other growth. So they were contacting Old Dominion to kind of adjust that study. So just so you know, they are working on that. They also had, right before I left to come here, they were having a presentation on how the workforce board would work with some of the industries that had closed in the area and work with persons who had lost jobs in the area, and what they're doing to help support them. And I left before the presentation. So Tracy, the director, was going to send me that. So I'll make sure I give it to our clerk so she can send it to council members so we can know what efforts are being made to address plant closures as well as persons who have been displaced by loss of jobs. So they are probably sending us that report of what the workforce board is doing so we can be, more knowledgeable. I do want to say that on Monday, the Martin Luther King Commission here in Lynchburg is having an annual breakfast. I know the breakfast is already sold out, but again, we're looking forward to that event. I recognize Martin Luther King and his great accomplishments and his contributions to our nation. Again, I said the event is sold out, but we're looking, those who already have tickets, we're looking forward to that event, and I'm glad we can have that in person. Also, on that Tuesday, the 17th, we're doing middle school, where we're working my kids back to the second semester. So any man that can help us out, if you go to my Facebook page or other places, I can give you information about the times for the high schools, the middle schools, and elementary schools. We're welcoming our kids back to school, and just saying we support them, telling them to help finish strong, just so we're a stronger community and doing more positive things together that will bring our community together, not divide our community, but showing support and love to one another and love for our children. You know, I looked at the football player that got injured last week on the football field, that died pretty much on the field, and they were kneeling and praying for him. And it shows how when a tragedy happens, our community comes together. So we need to continue to support our community and continue to support one another. Thank you.
Councilwoman Dolan?
Nothing really, except I just want to apologize to the citizens of Lynchburg for the way this was jammed up.
Councilman Hutchinson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, it is something, back in this previous council, and I looked through some old papers, back in the fiscal year 2021, city reports unprecedented surplus. Well, that was unprecedented until the next year. So in 2022 fiscal year ends in a $27.6 million surplus. The next year has another $43 million surplus. When we look at that, this unprecedented surplus, I talked and I asked, what can we do about this? Our city attorney replied on several fronts when we talked about it during the budget, talked about it, the last thing was an email on September 27th, gave the state code section 15.2.2511.1, said how can you return the surplus of the local surplus funds. Said one way you can do it is lowering the tax rate. Another way you can lower some fees, you can lower B-poll thresholds, you can waive fees. And so with that, you know, I look back on these last little over 6 months, once we saw this second humongous surplus coming, I tried every facet, the normal channels. I discussed it at roll call. I brought it forward at the Finance Committee. We discussed it several times, brought it forward to council, talked with city staff about what can we do to actually refund this surplus to the taxpayers. We talked about the fact that the taxes have, that tax increase that happened in fiscal year 2022, a $4.8 million tax increase. Then you end up with a $43 million surplus. What we need to do is actually give that back. So when we're looking at giving it back, according to our city attorney, there's several ways we can do it. I think the best way that we can do it is making sure that we refund the tax increase. Councilmember Feraldi and I voted against this budget back in 2021 when they had that first tax increase of $4.8 million. We said it shouldn't have been there. It wasn't completely unnecessary. At the end of the year, we're proven correct. $43 million surplus. Once we have that surplus, that needs to go back to the taxpayers. That cannot be just frittered away or hidden or put off any longer. You know, we now have a new council today. We have council that campaigned on the fact that taxes are too high. They campaigned on the fact that enough. We need to actually look out for our citizens. So I make a motion that we lower the tax rate to $1.03 effective November 1st, 2021.
Second.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
May I briefly interject?
Yes.
And I bring this up because I want, I know we have some new members of council. I just want to be sure everyone is on the same page as to the advice that was previously given. So Virginia law recognizes two methods to return surplus funds, one of which is for personal property taxes, one of which is for real estate taxes. The city itself, through its staff, has to determine what the surplus was for that particular fiscal year, and that particular amount is what can be refunded. What Councilmember Helgeson brings up as it relates to the other matters may be a surplus, but those amounts may not be able to be refunded, so to speak. What he had mentioned as it relates to lowering the tax rates, as to changing fees, et cetera, are alternatives to provide relief to taxpayers. It's not necessarily a refund. I just want council as a body to be clear on that there's only two ways a refund can be done, and there has to be a determination as it relates to those two specific sources of funds that there is a surplus. And I suppose, I know we've addressed it before, I don't think since January 1 it has come up as to what the surplus amounts for that, those two areas are, if any. But I just wanted to make clarification there.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Thank you.
Councilman Mischins.
So we're in a recession right now. The individuals, families, and businesses in our great city that fund this municipal corporation with their hard-earned tax dollars are burdened by the rising costs of goods and services. Now, I campaigned to fight for the citizens, not for the government and the bureaucracy. I am here to represent the citizens. And I'm concerned about our taxpayers being able to pay their bills and put food on the table for their families. This isn't the time to sit on high tax rates. It's time to lower them. So I'll be supporting this measure, and I'll be joining Councilmember Helgeson to deliver bold tax relief to our Lynchburg citizens tonight.
Vice Mayor Feraldi.
Madam Mayor,
Sorry, he-
I move to amend the motion to defer consideration until our second February meeting.
Okay, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Madam Mayor, I move to defer consideration to our second February meeting.
Can I second that? I can
That's
second
a
that.
motion to amend the motion.
So it sounds like there is a request for an amendment as to the main motion. If there's a consensus of council to do that, then certainly you can. What I would suggest, if I might be so bold to, the rate is set by ordinance. So while we are addressing this, we need to have a formal ordinance before City Council to make a decision like this. So I think Vice Mayor Feraldi's request is in order.
Can I second his request, or does it have to be a second on that?
You could second it, or another member
Or-
could second it.
Okay, Dr. Wilder will second it, okay. Would you like to speak? Yes.
You know, I've only been a councilman 7 years, I guess. We've never, to my knowledge, made a motion during roll call. I don't think. Have we ever made a motion during roll call? Have we had? Oh, my goodness gracious, it must have been something really special. But normally, we don't make motions during roll call. I would like to hear from, again, I'd like to hear from staff, hear what the staff has to say, the implications of that. I mean, we have a city manager. We have a finance team that handles all of this, that we're paying to do all the main pieces of our city. And I respect them. I respect your leadership. I respect our finance director. So I'd like to hear what she has to say. But normally, and what I always do when we're doing budget sessions, I listen to what the finance team are suggesting to us and saying what's the best for our community. You know, I want a livable community. I want a community that has parks. I want a community that has trails. I want to be in a community that supports their schools. You know, so sometimes we're making decisions that has consequences. You got to understand there's certain consequences. You can say we can cut taxes down, we can cut this, that, but do you want a policeman being compensated? Do you want to build a police station? Do you want a new fire truck? There are certain consequences you got to understand that. So I'm here from the finance team that's here. What are the consequences that's going to ramifications of a change in tax rate in the middle of I don't know if it's for the current budget cycle? I'm so confused. Is it the current budget cycle or the next budget cycle? So I need to understand what are we voting on? Thank you.
Continue.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate the heart of the motion. It's what I want to do, candidly. In looking back, technically by my motion for the general fund and accommodating a $1.2 million tax credit, One could argue even the real estate tax rate went down 2 cents in an interesting way. I want to know exactly how all financial matters are going to impact the city. I mean, let's be clear. I support moving this direction. I do. And yet, within the name of conservative fiscal responsibility, this notion would, the motion prior to mine would make it an off-the-cuff, unbeknownst to 5 members, maybe 4 members of council. This would be a $6 million vote off the cuff. And that's baloney. So I want this money going back to folks. I want it going right back tonight if I could. The motion prior to mine would not accommodate that because we don't even have the resolution. So the motion to amend would afford us the ability to adopt a motion that creates that process, creates that language, so I can see the dotted I's, the crossed T's, and understand exactly where these tax dollars are going to be. And so I hope by supporting the amended motion, we can adopt that and then move forward accordingly with the time to make an articulate and informed decision about this matter in February.
Mr. City Attorney, what would happen at this point, since we have the amended?
It's my understanding there is a amended/substitute motion on the table at this point, and that's what's being discussed. So the discussion would continue until all council members are ready to vote on the substitute motion, which, as I understand it, is to table this matter, the motion that's presented, until the second meeting in February.
Got it.
And for clarity, if I may, it's a motion to amend, which is slightly different. And if we need to utilize that, I can explain why at the time.
So if it's a motion to amend, then what's before City Council, it's been seconded. The discussion is whether to amend the motion to to be considered on the second meeting in February, not a substitute motion.
Councilman Higginson?
You know, when we look at this and we look at what's happened over the last 6 months, seeing the fact that last year's surplus, the previous year, the $27 million surplus, coupled with this most recent surplus of $43.5 million surplus. So this refund, the lowering of the tax rate, is coming directly out of the unspent $43 million surplus. So wanting to know, of course, I'm not going to bring something that is going to jeopardize, but I do bring things forward that actually are in the best interest of our taxpayers. And it's quite frankly irresponsible to not give this back to the taxpayers. So the first $4.8 million comes directly from this $43 million surplus. Now, it would be irresponsible if we said, hey, let's give the whole $43 million back before the city spends it. No, we're talking about basically 10% of this $43 million surplus. And this surplus was directly resulting because of council action before that said, hey, let's not keep the tax equalization rate of $1.03, let's raise it to $1.11, generating $4.8 million more tax burden on our taxpayers, going to the coffers of the city, which now has an extra resources, an extra surplus. Now, with that being the case, I've been pushing for this so it's not a hurried item. I told you before, I've been battling this exact thing for 6 months. But at that time, we didn't have a council that campaigned on saying taxes are too high and we need to give this back to our citizens. Didn't have a council that was elected by the citizens that said, darn right, taxes are too high. This needs to come back to us so we can actually use our money more prudently and allow our properties to grow and prosper. This was before a council that campaigned on the fact that, wow, we need to have fiscal discipline and responsibility in budgeting, that we think about the needs of our citizens, especially during a recession, especially when after what was stated in those previous budget votes, the fact that actually it happened came to fruition, that tax increase was not needed. We still had that extra $4.8 million. So with that, again, to delay, I understand some folks want to delay. Quite frankly, I've been working on this for almost a year, quite frankly. When at first I started recognizing the revenues were going through the roof on the city government because of ARPA money, because of CARES Tranche 1, CARES Tranche 2, CARES Tranche 3, money to GLTC, money to the airport. Money was flowing all over creation to the city government, thus a 39% increase in funding last year's budget. With that, what didn't have an increase in funding is our citizens. What did have an increase for our citizens was the fact that they got to pay 10% more for eggs. Their electric bills are going through the roof, gas prices soaring. We're here to represent the citizens, not to represent, no offense, to disrespect to our fine folks in government. We need to make sure that we have ample taxes that can do the necessary functions of government. Not having a $43 million surplus. I hope we can vote on this now because this has been waiting way too long. For 6 last months, every time I brought it up, by the majority of council said, no, we need the funds. So I hope we don't delay this anymore because every time that happens, another quarterly payment comes up. The first one was November 15th. We could have taken action on it before that first bill went out. We now have another bill coming out January 15th. We could have taken care of this before that. We're going to have another one coming up March 15th and another one coming up. So the longer we delay, the longer we wait, the less, the more ways we're going to spend the money as a government, and the more we have to undo and give back to our taxpayers. So I'm not interested in amending and delaying. I'm interested in voting for our taxpayers like was campaigned on, like we talked about. Trying to do the very beginning of a year is make sure that we turn things over, make sure that we're now citizen-centric as opposed to government-centric. So I hope you support, or I hope you deny the amendment to the motion to table or to delay or to have any other thing else, realizing that the city staff can come up with the exact language in the resolution. They now know where we're going to stand. So let's vote on that, and they can come back with the resolution. So thank you.
Councilman Madoli?
Now, I really have a real bad feeling the way all of a sudden this stuff is being crammed and jammed down our throats tonight. I just think it's irresponsible and it's outrageous that we have to do this without some sort of in-depth study. And I think many of you probably remember 2008, 2009, when they did lower the real estate taxes, and we had to furlough 80, 90 employees and cut services. And until you're willing to tell us what services you're willing to cut, I don't think I could support that. And you do understand that this reduction is really a reduction for the wealthy. It's not a reduction for the average person. It does not give them much money back. So I think that's really fascinating that you insist on pushing this through at this time when this is not even on our agenda.
I'm not wealthy, and it would help me. And I know a lot of middle-class families that I live with in Vista Acres and other parts of the city where I live that would absolutely see the benefit of bold tax relief today. So, I really hope that Vice Mayor Feraldi is going to withdraw this amendment and this amended motion, because we need to deliver bold tax relief to our citizens right now today. There's no reason that we can't do it. Before some of you were even living in Lynchburg, I was tracking the surpluses going through the roof over the last 5 years. There's been a steady increase in excess revenues and excess funds for the city government that came from the taxpayers over the last 5 years, and it's continued to increase. There's no doubt in my mind that we're probably on the same track record to have that same surplus this year. And I'm sure if we looked at the Finance Committee minutes, it would show that. So I would politely request that Vice Mayor Feraldi withdraw his amendment. I will not be supporting the amendment. I'll be voting against it. There's no reason that we can't deliver bold tax relief to our citizens tonight.
I'll make this comment. I don't believe this was necessarily the intention of roll call. There was the opportunity to make an amendment to the agenda to add this where we would have seen it coming and had a discussion like we did with the amendment that I made at the beginning of the meeting. I don't think it looks good. I don't appreciate how it was brought before council in this way. I think there's a better way to do business. While I do agree that we should have lower taxes, and I did campaign on that, and I do want to honor what I said to the people, I also want to do things the right way. So I hope that you will respect that and not hold that against me when I say I will agree with Vice Mayor Feraldi that we honor a system of doing things and that we don't throw things on people out of order and we do it right. So I will be supporting the substitute or amended motion for that reason, while still intending to provide tax relief to our citizens when we do this on another agenda. Councilman Huddleston?
Thank you. You know, this was done in order. It was done over the last 6 months or so. It was done over a year and a half ago at the budget process where I actually said there's no reason we need to be raising the taxes because this was on the cusp of a $27.5 million surplus. But council still said, hey, we're going to raise the taxes $4.8 million. It was actually done in order because every facet was tried to get this addressed decently and in order. I would address this privately with city manager as well as our chief financial officer. We talked about this surplus. She said, oh, it wasn't a surplus. Then she came back and said, okay, yeah, it was. We talked about it at the finance committee several times. We talked about it at roll call. Every facet was always like, nah, let's just wait. Let's wait another week. Let's wait another month. Let's think about it. Well, now's the time. And so I am hopeful that even if, based on the words that I'm hearing today, that even if it isn't done today, that it'll be done next week or as soon as possible. But it shouldn't have been delayed, and it was done. So I take disrespect at the fact that you're saying it wasn't done orderly, which I've tried at every turn. And I was so thankful that we had a new council that campaigned on lowering the tax burden on our citizens, and we're going to do it right away. When we talked about this as a caucus, we said, yep, this is going to be the first thing. I was hoping that it was going to be on the agenda like we talked about, and it wasn't. So I'm glad to see one of the items were on the agenda. I tried every facet, and when every facet doesn't work, I'm still going to fight for the taxpayers of Lynchburg. I'm still going to say whatever we can do to give tax relief to our citizens, that's what I'm going to do. I tried every facet. I tried in every normal procedure. Now it's an amendment, or now it's a motion that is on the floor, duly seconded. We should actually take care of this today, so I hope you vote down the amendment, the delay, and move forward. And if not, I certainly hope that you're going to actually, if you do amend it, that you will vote in favor of it in short order. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to thank Councilman Helgeson for his remarks. And I'm reminded of that meeting we had on December 2nd where we agreed that this was going to be a first meeting item for our citizens. I'm not here to honor a system. I'm here to honor the citizens. And that's what this does. And that's why I think it's important that we oppose this amendment and vote on the original motion to provide bold tax relief to our citizens today.
I'd like to call for a vote on the amended motion, please. To amend the motion.
Okay.
Motion passes 4-3.
So now, Madam Mayor, the amended motion is on the table for a vote, if council is ready to vote on it. And as I understand it, the motion is to make the described rate change that Councilmember Helgeson had mentioned, but to consider that on the second regular meeting in February.
Yes.
I have a clarification question. So that is that that you would vote for the prescribed rate change? Is that what you're voting for now?
May I respond if you don't
On the
mind?
second?
May I respond? That's okay.
Go ahead.
Doesn't sound right to me.
I pulled a date out of the back of my head. That was enough time for us to get this all together, given the fact that we did not know such a motion was coming. So I apologize, but that's enough to reconsider this in the second meeting in February.
Okay, it's reconsidered, now you used words like vote for the rate change on February.
It was my understanding that the motion that was adopted, that was amended, was that Vice Mayor Feraldi had not necessarily substituted, but amended Councilman Helgeson's original motion to be heard in the second meeting of February. So the original motion stands, but not to be adopted tonight, to be reconsidered for adoption in the second meeting of February.
Okay.
Which would not preclude City Council from bringing up alternate motions and alternate considerations on that date.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion to amend the motion to move it to January 24th. So in deference to what Councilmember Feraldi said about the time frame, pulling it out of the back of the air, and throw the second meeting in February, I would like this to be January 24th, which is the second meeting in January, which should give ample time for staff to come up. It'll be 2 weeks from now, as opposed to a month and 2 weeks.
I did not acknowledge you, so I think that Councilman
Yes, you did.
Nolan was talking. I did not.
I object.
I did not. Weren't you speaking?
Point of order. No, she was done. Point of order.
I did not.
Point of order,
recognize
Mr.
you.
Parliamentarian.
I did not recognize the councilman.
You actually did.
What I would submit is there is a motion on the table for vote at this point. I had stated the previous motion, which was Councilman Helgeson's motion to change the rate as he described, but it would not be considered for adoption until the second regular meeting in February. That is one that is properly in order for a vote this evening.
Okay.
I would submit at this point it wouldn't be appropriate and not in order to make an additional motion on an already amended motion.
So, Mr. City Attorney, if I may appeal, in our Rules of Procedure, page number 16, a motion may be amended no more than twice. This was the second amendment. So, thank you. So,
And I'll second Councilman Helgeson's motion.
Okay, so is there discussion?
so again, as I was finishing, if I may.
Councilman Helgeson?
So as I was saying, you know, the issue is the timeliness, and I can respect that. And so rather than, again, a month and a half from now, it's 2 weeks from now. And in 2 weeks from now, if you don't like the resolution that is presented, vote against it at that time. But hopefully, we'll be able to do this, since we're not able to do it today. We'll at least be able to look at it and be able to approve it in 2 weeks. So I hope you'll support the resolution to amend to January 24th, which, Madam Mayor, is my birthday. So I would appreciate it to have a good party on my birthday when we give full tax relief to our citizens. So I hope you can vote for that. Thank you.
Okay, any discussion on that?
I have the floor for the second, ma'am.
Councilman Mischins?
So I agree with Councilman Helgeson. We need to get our citizens bold tax relief as soon as possible. That's why I'll be supporting his amendment to move this to January 24th.
Okay, any more discussion? Councilman Wilder?
Yes, just a question for the city manager. You know, right now, we're in the regular budget process. So the staff and the schools are rapidly working on our current budget. And I really don't think it's fair to them to do something like this at the last minute to them. Does the staff even have time to get it ready by the 24th? To me, at least, let me ask you a question. To me, at least having it in February, at least would allow staff to have more time. So I would support not this motion, but the other motion, at least to give staff more time. I would be considerate of the staff's time pulling all this together and all the possibilities that come with it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Can I ask? Yeah, that's a decent question. I think, Mr. City Attorney, knowing your expertise, I'm sure you can have this ready by tomorrow, but January 24th, 2 weeks gives you ample time?
Councilman Helgeson, these are financial matters which, involve many different facets of the city. You know, the proposed amended ordinance, would not take a lot of time to do, but these are considerations that City Council I would submit should consult the city manager on before making any decision on something like this.
But per Councilmember Wilder's question about can the city attorney prepare the documents, the answer then is yes? Well, I'm asking that then.
That wasn't the question as I understood
Well, I'm
it.
asking that question. It's because that's why I took it. But you could prepare the
I
documents.
could prepare
Yes.
a
Okay.
proposed ordinance fairly quickly.
Great. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Any other discussion? Okay, I would like to call for a vote for the proposed amendment.
If you can repeat it for everybody, just to...
That's correct. So the motion on the table is to whether or not to accept Councilman Helgeson's second amendment to change the date from February, the second meeting in February to the second meeting in January.
January 24th.
January 24th, his birthday. Okay, so let's vote.
Point of order.
So the motion passes.
Point of order.
So council,
Councilmember Taylor must vote for or against.
Oh, he abstained.
Oh, maybe you hit the wrong button the first time.
No, it didn't.
Do we need to reset it?
so the rule on abstaining, as council recalls, is that unless there is a conflict of interest that legally prohibits a council member from voting, or the entirety of council by a majority vote consents to the abstention, council members are not prohibited, or excuse me, not permitted to abstain from voting on matters.
Okay, so let's call vote again, please.
The motion passes 5-2.
Madam Mayor, I move to recess until 7:30.
I'll
Well-
second that.
No.
I will second that. I know
guess-
we're amending the agenda, but that is true. That is
Madam Mayor,
wise.
what I would,
Just roll call.
Madam Mayor, what I would submit is, that motion isn't in order at this time. There's still a motion that needs to be considered
Okay.
on the table.
Okay.
So there is now, the motion has been amended,
Gotcha, yes.
and so now there has to be a
Goes to the
motion
main
to
motion.
adopt
Yep.
the new main motion, which
Okay.
is Councilmember Helgeson's newly adopted motion to consider his proposal on January 24th.
Okay, so,
So there has to be a motion to adopt that and a second.
Well, it's already, it goes, no, it doesn't. It already goes back. Yeah, Councilmember Feraldi knows.
All right,
You
so
explained
go
it,
ahead.
too.
I guess you all could vote on whether to accept the new motion on the table.
is there, yes?
Madam Mayor, so that I understand, the expectation is for city staff, which would include the city attorney who draws up a resolution and the city manager that works for the finance department to be prepared on the 24th to reduce by 8 cents, 4.8 million, as I understand it, from Councilman Helgeson, you said November of what, 21? Was that correct? I was trying to remember from the time frame that you said. And so then by the 24th, we have to prepare a balanced budget that was fiscal '23. We have to find 4.8 million within 2 weeks to return to the taxpayers, and then appropriately kind of give you context as to what that means. And just for context, pennies on the real estate are 600,000, right? So what he's proposing, I think there was a number that was out there, I just want to understand, is 4.8 million.
Yes.
So in that, understand that maybe there may be, as defined, surpluses. That is then a budget that you adopted as of a certain set date, okay, that travels from July 1 through to June 30. The expectation is those budgets are then balanced or those that way for that fiscal year until you get into a new budget process, which is what's pending. Councilman Helgeson is absolutely correct in that throughout my tenure in our one-on-ones and others, he has talked about tax relief and how that's taken up. In this last fiscal '23, there was it was a different council, understood. There was an expectation that there was 2 cents that was returned to the public through tax relief. As well, there was also through personal property, which, just by way of kind of context, more people, by way of context, receive relief through personal property because more people own vehicles. So that was some of the conversation, just some of the conversation. So understand that in putting this together, because right now I'm having a little bit of a wrestling match with the state assembly, in my mind. because the State Assembly, good gracious, they moved May elections to November. Because the awesome thing would have been with this new body, as of July 1, I would have had much more time during the summer to really kind of engage you on how the process works. Now, November, you're installed, but you take office as of January 1, which is right here as we begin kind of our fiscal budget process. In this, I'm just offering that I've proposed and sent late last calendar year a process by which you put together a budget, you talk through it, you adopt certain things. I understand well the expectation of what should have happened by way of something in the previous budget based on a new body, what have you. I'll say from a professional manager standpoint, when you start to impact a balanced, proposed, and/or adopted budget in the middle of a fiscal year, it's one of those things that you got to kind of think through. So I understand the 2 weeks, and I'm always going to say we're going to be prepared, right? Because I'm going to push staff. The reality is, I would purport, or at least say, and it'd be remiss of me not to say this as a professional manager, 20-plus years in this business, doing different things, once wearing a city attorney's hat, glad that I don't wear anymore. How this would go is you take this up in your budget process, right? You take it in a linear approach to how something would work. I understand well Councilman Helgeson's points, actually well taken as to the impact of some of those things, but I thought to say this now, just as a who I am and what you expect of me and how a process goes. That's why I took the time to make sure that you understood a budget adoption process that afforded you the ability to have these same types of conversations that were had in the fiscal 23 process. But again, you seven are my boss, and I have 1,200 employees that report to me, and I'm going to do my best to meet your expectations about what you want, but I'm always going to make sure you understand some of the procedural impacts and what that takes. So understood. Madam Mayor, thank you for the opportunity, and members of City Council, to kind of interject that while you're in your motion process. And with that, Madam Mayor, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else have any discussion?
Okay, what's the motion on the floor now?
So it's the second amended motion to consider Councilman Helgeson's proposal on January 24th.
So we've got plenty of time still to consider it at that time.
Thank you.
So just restate one more time.
The
Oh, sorry,
motion.
what, on the 24th?
My motion, thank you, is to actually address this on January 24th. Hopefully that'll give staff plenty of time. At that time, we can then vote either for it or against it, or if we don't have ample opportunity or ample discussion, we can then actually table it again. But hopefully we'll have ample information so we can actually vote on it in 2 weeks.
Okay,
So-
so if we do not have enough information at that time,
At that time, it's always,
Then
I
we
mean,
can vote.
And two, even if they bring the information that they have, at that time, we can table it and say, hey, we need more discussion. So at least it comes forward in 2 weeks, as opposed to months after months after months of being put off like it has been for these last 6 months. So at least it puts a deadline on it. So
Vice Mayor Feroldi?
I'm curious, if that's the point, that we will have the ability to delay it on the 24th,
want it delayed
why
on the
can't I have the floor?
yeah, no.
Then why go through this whole mirage, this whole show
I don't
of
want
doing
it
it right
delayed.
now?
I want it done
Councilmember, I have
today.
the floor.
I
I
know, I'm
appreciate
sorry.
your insights greatly.
Yeah,
Trust me,
go ahead.
I want to do this. But if we can delay it then, what's the problem in delaying it now? And so that way we can make the most informed decision. What a show. I mean, the fact that this was pre-planned by 3 people in my own party to do this now, today, is complete baloney. I want to do the boldest tax relief I can possibly do. I'm the only one to successfully get bold, in any form, tax relief in the last 10 years on this council through the property tax rate. Guess what? The Rhino did that. I mean, look, that's just the truth. Let's do this. Let's get it done in the right way. This is not how you do it. No public hearing, no understanding about what's going on. I want to make the best decision I can and align with my conservative principles.
Councilman Helgeson?
So with that, and normally we have decorum up here and not calling people names and stuff, so I won't do that. The issue is, can we have bold tax relief? I wanted this done actually on the agenda. I wanted to discuss 3 months ago, quite frankly. The majority of council didn't want to. They said, hey, we can Let's think about it later. Let's figure other things. Now we have the opportunity. I wanted it on the agenda 2 months ago. I wanted the agenda today. I tried every facet. Now we have the ability to actually I'd like to vote for it today so we can cut the checks tomorrow. It's not going to happen, I get it. Let's do it as soon as possible. Let's make sure that in 2 weeks we have ample room. We can think about it. We can cogitate it over the next 2 weeks. The city will come up with a great plan and we'll give tax relief to our citizens. So I hope you vote in favor of this tax relief for January 24th. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilman Wadler?
I just want to offer apologies to our city manager and the staff. To me, it's not fair to ask you to do all this in 2 weeks' time, especially when a budget's already been approved. I've never seen anything like this in my life. So I apologize to the city staff. I appreciate your hard work. I appreciate you right now trying to figure out how to do the current budget, and now you got to go back and work on another budget that has already been approved. So I continue to pray for you. I continue to I'm sorry. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to call for a vote, please.
Motion fails.
Madam Mayor, I move to recess till 7:30.
A second.
That motion is out of order because we have 2 items left on the agenda that you duly adopted.
That's correct.
You even had the ability to actually amend it, as was stated earlier, of which you didn't amend it. So we have 2 items left on the docket.
Okay, so we're going to finish roll call?
Yes, you'll finish roll call, and you also have 2 closed sessions to address.
I would like to also apologize to everyone for how this is going. I appreciate the people that are giving grace for my very first night up here. Thank you for the prayers. I do appreciate it. Okay, so I believe next in line for roll call, and I'm sorry for the time this is taking. Everybody was wanting a break. Probably people need dinner, so I apologize. I believe next for roll call was Councilman Mischins.
No, I think that Councilman Helgeson.
He already spoke. That was when he made his motion.
All right. So just a couple things. I think that it's great that we were able to get that Second Amendment sanctuary resolution passed, and I'm thankful that we're going to support the God-given right to self-defense in the city. One thing that I think that we need to do to make sure that we are putting a check and balance on the city to make sure that we're doing that right is I'd like to see something from city staff, probably a resolution in the future that requires periodic red flag reports to show how we're honoring that resolution by having those public reports issued on some sort of periodic basis. And just one other thing too, it's come to my attention through an employee whistleblower that reached out to me that employees in the city are still being discriminated against based on their vaccine status. And many folks have legitimate reasons for not getting the COVID-19 vaccine. Some of those are religious obligations. And some employees are being forced to use their own earned sick leave if they're not vaccinated. Employees are being forced to use their own earned sick leave or paid time off. I guess it depends on which type of employee they are, because I know some VRS employees are PTO and some are the legacy vacation, sick, and personal leave. So I just want to look into that to make sure that we're not treating employees differently, because it sounds to me from what I heard in the documents that were actually given to me that vaccinated employees are given administrative leave with pay and they are not required to burn their earned sick leave. So I think those are shaky grounds that we are on. If people are getting the vaccine for a religious objection or things like that, if they're not getting it, then we shouldn't be discriminating against them.
At some point, we had basically discontinued that policy of using, I think anyone now, if you're sick, you have to use your own sick leave, regardless of your vaccination status. But I'll confirm that.
Yeah, that's why I'm just pointing it out to you so we can follow up and make sure that
Yes,
we're not
sir.
discriminating against our employees. Thank you.
Okay, and Councilmember Taylor?
Yes, came to my attention this week that T.C. Miller School, the pipes burst and the children had to go to West Lynchburg Baptist Church for classes.
that being a church, they was asked to remove their crosses for the kids, so the kids wouldn't see them when they come into the schools. I think that's unacceptable. Going into the church had to remove their crosses so the children wouldn't see them. I think it would have encouraged the children. And also, our public safety. We didn't discuss that today. We ran on public safety, and that's very important. I know we need to lower taxes, but public safety should be one of our #1 priorities. We have to make sure our men and women in uniform can do their job safely and protect the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Feroldi?
I want to congratulate two folks from EC Glass. I came across this in my social media feeds, and it was just a really heartwarming story. Penn William for receiving the Athletic Boosters Excellence Award for football, and I believe there's one more for George White for winning the prestigious Rucker Cup. Just wanted to congratulate them for their work and their athleticism and their academic success.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so yesterday, January 9th, was National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, a day to be grateful for the men and women who put their lives on the line to serve this community every day. We give thanks to these officers who keep us safe and recognize the difficult situations they deal with daily. From investigating a burglary to managing crisis situations and everything in between, to the members of our Lynchburg Police Department and our Lynchburg Sheriff's Office, we appreciate you and we thank you for your service. As far as my roll call message, I would like to tell you all how thankful I am to be your mayor, how thankful I am for our vice mayor and our council members, for our city staff. They've been so wonderful welcoming me in this week, helping me kind of find my way around. We have some wonderful city employees. I'm very excited about starting off the year with our new council. And I just wanted to say something. I think it is very important that our citizens know that we are going to make every effort to represent them well. And there is a level of decorum that is, I think, owed to them that we need to acknowledge and use amongst ourselves here on council as far as the rules and procedures that are that we are supposed to be following. And I think that it is important that we show everyone in the room respect that they are owed and deserved, and I hope that we will follow that. So thank you very much, and we will move on. Consideration of a closed meeting to discuss the acquisition of real property for public safety purposes where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A3 of the Code of Virginia, 1950, as amended, and to discuss the potential resolution of a pending city law enforcement lawsuit pursuant to Sections 2.2-3711A7 and A8 of the Code of Virginia, 1950, as amended. May I have a motion to go into a closed meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Councilman, we got a second?
I was recognized. I think.
Councilman Helgeson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Considering the time is 6:30, and considering the fact that we'll have an open session after this evening, I would suggest by unanimous consent that we take the two closed session items and move them to after the 7:30 meeting tonight, if that would be prudent for the rest of council.
It's better for me to go now.
Yeah, I mean, some staff might need to stay later. I'd rather wait, since it's so late we can't do anything anyway. Might as well go get them out the way now.
Yeah, miss dinner.
So it sounds like there needs to be a vote to go ahead and accept the closed sessions if there's not consensus.
Right.
Can I have an approximation for time for the presentations?
What would you say yours is?
10 minutes.
20 minutes mine.
So that's 30 minutes, so if we could move it to this evening.
I'm sorry, Councilman, absent questions or anything else.
Yes, which we need.
Absent questions, it's 30 minutes.
Yeah. So I'll make a motion that we would move this to this evening's session. I know there's some that don't agree. I know that some don't agree, but I think our meeting will be probably short this evening, since one item that was going to be discussed tonight has already been finished, so.
Well,
Second.
we can discuss it now, so who can't be here?
I'll be here, I guess I have to be. We gotta accommodate the new majority.
No, I'm not trying to be.
Well-
You're bullying your way through
No, I'm
this
not,
whole meeting.
but Councilmember for the Vice Mayor actually said we should adjourn about 30 minutes ago, and so now it's that time. Yeah.
Of course you would.
Well, I would like to give the staff an opportunity to use the restroom, have a coffee, and have a dinner. That would be my concern for you, more importantly than anything else. But I would also like to respect everyone's time, and I would like to give you an opportunity to express your vote for if you would like to put it to the end of the meeting. So let's call it to a vote. If you would like to push this to after the 7:30 meeting, go ahead and vote.
Councilmember Taylor, Ms. Lee, your vote? Motion fails.
You ready?
Don't we need a motion to go into closed session?
So I suppose now we need a vote to go into closed session.
Okay, so we need to vote to go into closed session.
Give me 1 second to record these.
Mine no light's still on.
May I have a motion to go into closed session?
Well, we need to get rid of those lights.
Yes, hold on.
Sorry.
You're good. Okay. I do need a motion to go into closed session.
Someone had it, who moved?
I didn't catch that motion then.
I seconded, I don't know the first thing.
I'll make it.
Okay, so,
A second?
all right, thank you. Do we vote into closed session? We cast a vote? Okay, we need to cast a vote for to go into closed session, please?
Motion passes.